Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Crucial Components for Credentialing Success, Security and Compliance Insights. I'm Laura Fottenberry, the Director of Marketing at Xvoucher. Today, I'm excited to introduce our amazing panelists. Please join me in welcoming Tracy Hembry, who's the Vice President of Business Development at Alpine Testing Solutions, and Jake Hoff, the Vice President of Sales at Xvoucher. Both bring valuable knowledge to the credentialing space. Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping notes. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them in the chat. We have time allotted for Q&A towards the end of the conversation. This webinar will be recorded, and you'll receive a copy of the recording in case you need to go back and review the material that we've covered. Now for the topic at hand. Today, we're going to be exploring how emphasizing content security and compliance can boost your credentialing program's competitiveness. You should walk away with insights into leveraging data forensics to protect your content and tips that will help you with tax compliance as you expand your program to a global audience. So Tracy, let's start with you. Can you briefly explain why it's important for credentialing programs to prioritize content security?
Sure. So first, I just want to start by saying thank you for including me in this conversation. I'm happy to be here with you today. So I'm happy to chat about why I think security is important. It's probably helpful for this conversation for me to let you in on a secret that I am actually a psychometrician. So I am all about the data. I am all about nerding out on the stats, and I could talk about that for well longer than an hour. But it also means that validity is a top priority. In all of the work that I do, it's top of mind, and it's the focus of the work that I spend day in and day out doing at Alpine. And so validity is really about providing scores that mean what we think they mean, or what we claim them to mean. So if we say that a passing score means that a candidate has demonstrated some sufficient level of knowledge and skills, then that's really what it should represent. So if your content isn't secure within your program, it means that candidates are earning that passing score potentially without having those knowledge and skills. And so that calls the validity of the program into question, along with those scores. So if people are earning the credential but don't have the needed knowledge and skills, it undermines your program. So we know it's no small effort to create and develop these exams and all of the content that goes along with them. And so I think what it comes down to with security is really protecting your investment. All of that time and energy and the resources that you've put into developing and maintaining your program, you're protecting it by considering security and taking that seriously and putting those safeguards into place within your program.
Great. Jake, what do you think about compliance in today's competitive landscape and why it's important for credentialing programs?
Yeah, Tracy really hit the phrase, right? Validity of the program. Very good. Basically for tax compliance, no surprises later. Do it now instead of being caught off guard. Not having funds to cover any tax liabilities if any of the tax jurisdictions come knocking on your door. It's not a good look for the program. Definitely not worth the scrambling and stress it would cause the people within the program that are running the program. So I would say just making sure your ducks are in order, in making sure that you have either an internal team for tax compliance purposes, or partner with somebody for that.
Great. Okay, Tracy, going back to something that you said earlier. So what are some of the common threats and challenges that credentialing programs may face when it comes to content security?
Sure. When I'm at conferences or different industry events, inevitably, I feel like there's a point in time where people start to share their war stories, right, when it comes to security. So I encourage those who are here with us today to kind of take part in those conversations. It makes for some very interesting stories about things like a giant teddy bear with a camera inside it, or other similar, unique situations. So there's lots of creative ways in which people have tried to kind of outsmart our security systems. So that could be a whole separate conversation. And, I think a lot of people at conferences and social settings will kind of share those war stories. But all of this is to say that breaches can come about in a variety of ways, and they can be creative. So the challenge is really to try and stay ahead of those challenges and those novel and creative ways in which candidates or other bad actors are trying to get an advantage on an exam. So there's a couple different kinds of threats or kind of buckets that you can put threats into. A big one that people talk about comes from candidate pre-knowledge. And so this is really about the exposure of your content from the exam and candidates getting access to that content prior to coming into the exam, right? So they've memorized the content, they know the answers coming in. And so those kinds of breaches can come from all different areas, right? So you could have candidates who come in, sit for the exam, and they sit and they record or memorize or in some way, collect that information, that content, and then share it outwardly with others after the fact. And then there's other ways that your candidates can get access to your content. So if you think about all of the people who touch your exam content from start to finish, right? So you have to think about all of those things. You've got subject matter experts who are contributing. You've got proctors who are administering the exams. All of these people have access to the content, and most of the time they're not out to harm the program, and so everything's great, but you do need to kind of put some safeguards in place. And then the other thing I just wanted to quickly touch on is, in addition to pre-knowledge, there's a lot of talk right now in the industry about proxy test takers and the risk that they pose. And this is something, if you kind of think back, there have been stories in the past, or you may have heard, they've done documentaries about it, having you pay someone to go in and take the SAT for you. So this is like the modern day version of that, right? So the good thing is that our field has reacted to those stories from before about the SAT. And so test centers commonly have biometrics in place. So it's really hard to go in and pretend to be someone else at a center. But when you're doing online proctored exams, there's not quite as much security around that and ways to ensure that the person who is taking the test is the person that they say that they are and is the one getting credit. So that's definitely something that is top of mind right now in the industry, those proxy test takers, and how do we protect our programs against them?
Gotcha. That makes sense. That's scary to think of all the different ways, and people are always a step ahead, right? Jake, anything you want to add to what she was saying?
No, so that great stuff, Tracy, and I'm hiding my bear with the camera inside of it right now, but 100% stuff that everybody needs to be aware of, and as far as security goes, it's really about I already talked about the validity of the program, but it's really about having the right people taking the exams and not cheating the system, and so really good points, Tracy.
Thanks.
Great. Okay, Jake, this next one's for you. So how can online credentialing programs ensure that they're remaining tax compliant when they're expanding globally, or what are some of the pitfalls that they should think about to avoid as they're expanding globally?
Right. Yeah. So you have to think about the fact that the buyer of your training or exams or learning materials may not be the learner, right? So it could be an admin for an organization that's coming in and purchasing these, and then they're distributing them out to the learner. So let's say that someone in the US purchases training courses for a team at their company, distributes out the access codes. If the learner is, let's say, in the UK or India, then you actually have to pay several different types of taxes, and pay attention to that, and be aware and educated on the different tax jurisdictions and their regulations. So tax regulations are constantly changing. So you don't have to you don't have to have internal tax people guiding you or legal experts guiding you internally, but you can also rely on your partners, right? The biggest thing is just don't open yourself up for the risk. At Xvoucher, we collaborate with tax and legal experts worldwide to support our clients, and I can tell you right now that they are constantly having conversations, making sure that we're up to date on all the different tax jurisdictions globally within the 160 plus countries that we work within. So.
No, that makes sense. And I know I'm reading articles all the time about digital taxes and what different countries are trying to do to implement them or change them or wait to implement them. So that's good information. Tracy, anything you want to add there?
I was chuckling to myself thinking about all of these ongoing conversations between tax attorneys and global tax attorneys, and thinking that while I feel like I'm nerdy when it comes to numbers, I've got no idea about those things. So, I would not be able to keep up with those conversations, but it's good that there's someone to rely on who's keeping up with it all. So.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. So, Tracy, let's go back to you on this one. So what benefits can credentialing programs expect to see in terms of competitive standing and reputation when they prioritize security and compliance overall?
Yeah, so I think, to Jake's point about having all your ducks in a row, this is really, to me, it's about being proactive and not reactive. It's about making sure that you're covering all your bases and protecting your program to what could come up later. It may not be a current issue right now. Maybe you don't have any bad actors that are currently trying to gather your content now, but it could come up later, right? So being proactive, being prepared, both with security and compliance, I think is key. And so again, I see it as essential for protecting the program, for ensuring your program, right? All of the investment that you've put into it. And I think that it's, again, just about being prepared. So should something happen when it comes to security, if you have your ducks in a row, as Jake said, if you have considered security, you've put policies in place, you are being proactive and looking for issues, I think you catch them sooner. I think you are able and ready to respond when they do. And that allows you to really lessen the impact that it will have on your program than if you're caught off guard because you haven't been prepared.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jake, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so first of all, my mind's thinking ducks in a row. Now I'm going, where does that originate from? So I need to go look at that, right? After this webinar, that's like one of the tasks I'll have. But no, I mean, I think you're going to see a theme throughout this conversation about the proactive versus reactive, and really making sure that you're protecting your program and not having to be reactive to anything, because that puts stress on everybody from you, the program itself to the customers possibly, and that's not a good look for anybody. But yeah, I think you'll see that kind of theme throughout this discussion.
Okay. And do you also think, I mean, just thinking about what you guys were both just saying, it doesn't matter if you're a small company or a really large company, these are still things that you have to take into consideration.
Absolutely. I mean, it's compliance can bury you either way, right? Whether you're small or large. Larger organizations just have a bigger pool to play with, but there's also more risk because more people are involved, more learners are coming through the program, all that kind of stuff. Smaller programs, right? It could mean everything. And so, yeah, 100%, Laura.
Tracy, what are your thoughts on that? I agree 100%. I think, when it comes to security, what security protections are put in place for a program will look vastly different depending on all kinds of characteristics like size. But I think that the risk is there regardless of the size of your program. And again, I think, being proactive, attending to these issues up front is just beneficial because it really only takes one breach or one issue to really have a large negative impact on the program.
Great. Okay. Jake, let's start with you on this one. So what are some of the things you guys keep talking about staying proactive? So what are some of the things that people can do to stay ahead of the curve and adapt? Because it's obviously always evolving in both places. You've got people who are trying to beat the system. You've got, tax regulations that are changing. This all works together. What do you think programs can do to stay ahead?
Yeah, so first it's a matter of, determining who within the organization or maybe a partner is responsible for managing compliance issues, right? That has to happen, whether it's again internal or it's using a partner externally. New rules, regulations, they shift daily. Different countries having varying tax regulations, including income tax, VAT tax, sales tax. These regulations can be complex and subject to change. Something that that came up during a recent project that we were working on with the IDC. The Canadian government, Laura, you mentioned some countries are implementing these digital taxes, but the Canadian government is planning to move forward with a revenue tax on large corporations that are offering digital services. That's all of us. That's the world we live in, digital services. It's expected to go in effect January of 2024. Experts say that many other countries are expected to follow suit. So Canada's kind of leading the way. But whether you have internal tax compliance teams or one of your partners takes the tax compliance regulations and risks, this enables scalability for your program, which is a great thing, right? Opens up the doors to go into other countries that you maybe not able to get into currently. But it also puts your program in a position to be prepared for that tax compliance.
Great. So Tracy, what do you think? I mean, what are the ways to not be reactive and try to be as proactive as possible so that the fires aren't as often and you're prepared?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think from my perspective, obviously I'm biased because, this is something I really am passionate about, but I think that security is relevant to all aspects of the program, right? And so obviously I'm into numbers, I like statistics, so that's a whole aspect of it. But there are other ways in which to protect your program and to pay attention to the security of your program. So for example, it's really important that programs define what the security expectations are and make those explicit. So it's documenting policies, making it clear to your candidates what counts as a security violation within the program versus what's allowed. And then as you're outlining those, you also as a program want to think about, okay, if someone were to violate this policy, what are we going to do? How are we going to respond? What are the repercussions? And you want to make those repercussions explicit with the candidate population as well, so that everyone has the information. And so that really kind of lays the foundation of security for the program when you sit down and put these policies in place and the documentation. And then it comes into play in other ways that may not be as obvious. So even in designing your administration model, for example, so the way in which you deliver tests, security plays a role in that. And not just are you delivering in a test center or are you delivering online, but even the way in which you're delivering your items. So are you going to deliver what we would call fixed or linear forms where, there's a set of items and people see that same set of items in the form? Or are you going to do something a little bit different to minimize the exposure of your items? So something like linear on the fly testing or computer adaptive testing. And with those administration approaches, the items are being selected kind of on the fly for candidates in a way such that, if I sit down and take the test and Jake is sitting next to me, we're not seeing the same set of items, right? And so that's a way that you can build in some security controls within your program. So I really think that it permeates the program. And then of course, there's the data forensics that you can do, my favorite part. But there's such a wealth of analyses that you can do. And I think for people, probably most people who are not as enthusiastic about statistics as I am, it can be super overwhelming, right? So you can run all kinds of complex models, get like pages and pages of output. And I would think as a program that if you're not a data nerd like I am, that could be a bit much. And so I think, something that I would like to share is just that you don't have to dive into the deep end. You can start with some preliminary analysis. And if you have a security team internal, you have a partner that you're working with who understands how to navigate these waters, you can start simple and small and just kind of see, are there any signs of issues that we're seeing on our exams? And then if there's, some evidence that maybe something's going on, maybe that's where you bring in the more technical or the more complicated analyses. But I would say you can start small and just, start to gather some information and work with someone that you trust, whether that be your internal team or an external team, to kind of help you navigate all of these aspects of security.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm guessing too, I mean, if you've seen something pop up, there are also ways to say, how do we make this never happen again? Tracy, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So yeah, and this really, again, Jake said we're going to keep talking about being proactive, but I think, it starts at the beginning with outlining your policies, right? So how are you going to react? Are you going to, if you find a form or a handful of items online, right? So that they're on some brain dump site, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to pull that form? And if so, how are you going to replace it in a way that it doesn't impact the administrations for candidates who have scheduled and are waiting to test? And so I think a lot of this is just planning in advance. And, I think taking the approach of is kind of not positive as it sounds, but taking the approach that it's not a matter of if you're going to have security issues within your program, it's a matter of when. If you kind of can digest that and accept it, then it allows you to kind of put these plans in place and then actually give you the peace of mind that should something pop up, you've already thought through in advance how you're going to react to it. And then again, the other piece of that is, should something pop up, how much evidence do you need to compile in order to take action, whether that just be, invalidating a result or really, trying to track down the bad actor and take some kind of legal action against them, right? So I think thinking through all of those things in advance really makes you armed with some power in decision-making in the moment.
Well, and I think too, hearing about different breaches, hearing about different companies that have had issues in the past can help you to not make those mistakes as well. So it might not have had to happen to you or your company. It could have happened out there. And now you're like, wow, it's time to pay attention to this. It's time to understand, like Jake, you said, the new taxes that are going into effect in these countries, or it's time to figure out who will be responsible for this. You want to, Jake, take that one?
As far as I'm sorry, Laura, please repeat what.
Yeah, I mean, learning from others, right? Like,
oh yeah,
taking on, not the issues that they've had, but just learning from, someone has a breach or someone had this problem or they got, penalized in this way and it's in the media. Now you are paying attention. Now you're assigning someone at your company to take.
Yeah, really, it's paying attention to the industry, and learning from others' mistakes, right? That's huge. It'll help you build your policies. It'll help you build your, having control over your program, and learning from others is a lot of times you'd rather learn from others than learn from your own mistakes, right? But controlling the program, those upfront policies and information about the program that Tracy had mentioned, that's important. That's super important to be out there. And if you can control that into the areas that they're supposed to be, and people can rely on going to that dedicated area to see that information, there's going to be less surprises for people. Nobody likes surprises. Nobody from the program likes surprises. Customers, they don't like surprises. Candidates don't like surprises. All that trickles up, right? If a candidate has a bad experience or a customer does, that trickles up to the program. That gets out into the social media channels. That makes a negative impact on the program. So just making sure that you have the controls in place for your policies and that it's in a dedicated areas that people can access easily, and then just paying attention to the industry. Right. I mean, learn from others' mistakes. Don't make the mistakes yourself.
Tracy, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think particularly when we talk about areas of programs that are evolving and changing and we're trying to stay ahead of it, I think those are the areas where working together in our industry is so valuable, right? So it's, really having to rely upon experts in the field, whether it be tax compliance or security. So those who are out there day in and day out, this is what they're focused on. It's what they know. I think it's relying upon them. I also think it's, working with peers and hearing those firsthand stories about the giant teddy bear with the camera inside of it, right? So that you, can work with your proctoring solution or whomever to say, no giant teddy bears anymore, or whatever the case may be, right? So I think there's goodness just industry-wide for sharing these stories. And, in some cases, maybe they're mistakes, and in some cases they really, not to be cheesy, but it's like learning opportunities for all of us about how collectively we can come together to stay ahead and, jointly protect programs as a whole.
Right. And to what you both were just talking about, I've seen like different threads on Reddit, candidates talking about their experiences. I failed this test, I'm doing this now, or whatever it may be. So I think that that's always going to be going forward, something to think about. Tracy, let's start with you on this one. So how do you think AI can play into the credentialing space? Because we've talked about the giant teddy bear, and that's, not as technical, but how do we think, because all the conversations are kind of moving towards AI now.
Yeah, definitely. It gets a lot of attention at these industry events for sure. So I think that AI is already a powerful tool for our programs. I also think that candidates or bad actors could use it as a powerful tool, to try and combat security efforts or compliance efforts as well, right? So it could go both ways. So, I think that there are some great ways in which AI can be used to support security. So for example, there's a lot of talk right now about generative AI and creating more content faster, right, with the use of AI. And so what that allows you to do at a program, if you have more content, cheaper content, you can build up your item banks. That allows you to, I was speaking to those administration models earlier. Some programs haven't been able to tackle like a loft or a cat administration model where there's less exposure of items because they simply don't have enough items to do that. And so I think, utilizing AI for content generation may open up some doors and make some things feasible that otherwise weren't. Even if you're going to use like linear fixed forms, just to kind of complete this example, even if you weren't considering loft or cat, it could enable you to have some programs what they call a breach form. And it really is, you build a form, you put it on the shelf as a just in case, and then when you have a security breach, you're prepared and you can say that content's exposed. We have this one over here at the ready to deploy so that it doesn't impact your program, right? So I think there are many ways that, particularly around content generation, where AI can be helpful for security. We've seen AI used in other ways as well. So it's kind of a long-standing practice to search the internet for content to see if it's been exposed. It used to be that those searches were pretty straightforward and it had to be a quote unquote exact match of the content in order for it to be flagged. Now through through different learning models or language learning models, there's just more flexibility and capability of those tools where you can find an item where a synonym is used, or, where maybe the candidate didn't copy down the item word for word, but they got the gist of it. And now you can still catch that content being exposed as well. So those are just a few examples. And I think that, we're only going to see this ramp up and see more and more use of AI. I think the key is to make sure that we're, using it responsibly in the way that we employ it to enhance our programs. And then also, as best as we can, staying ahead of the way in which those bad actors are using it as well.
You're on mute, Laura.
That makes sense. Sorry about that. Jake, what are your thoughts on how AI is going to impact the industry?
Yeah, so AI, so I was on a webinar yesterday, and AI was brought up by like 5 or 6 different people from different companies, and it was like, it's like, holy cow, this is, obviously it's been a topic conversation for a while now, but it just keeps coming up. But AI, it hasn't taken over the world yet, but it's big, right? It's definitely going to have an impact on programs as they go forward. AI isn't good. AI isn't bad. It's a matter of being aware of AI and, preparing what it could mean for your program, and preparing what, to Tracy's point, those bad actors, right? If they're utilizing AI against you, you have to be ready for that. And just having precautionary measures in place and constantly, monitoring the evolution of AI and, making sure your program is impacted positively by the technology instead of negatively, is going to be super important, and making sure that, just staying on top of it, learning, again, learning from others' mistakes, right? There's other people out there that are going through the same things. One thing that, was brought up earlier that I think is, this industry is fantastic, right? There's Tracy and I and Laura and Haley, we've all been to several different, conferences together, and the amount of collaboration and cohesiveness at these conferences that, we're not all chasing the same stuff and we're not all doing the same things, but we're all talking to each other and making sure that we're working together. And AI is a perfect example of just the next time you're at a conference or in a call with somebody, talk to them about it. Well, how's that impacting your program? Because the more you learn about it, the more you're going to, possibly put some safeguards in place for yourself and positively impact your program.
Well, and to that, I mean, I think that, a lot, like you said, a lot of different companies, a lot of different people, a lot of different roles are talking about AI. And I think it's important to think about the fact that it hits every segment of this. So you're creating the content, you're creating assessments for the content, you're then, putting practice tests in place, then you're, what else comes with that? Then you're taking the exam, then you're making sure that everything was compliant tax related later. Like, it goes through every single area. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, Jake, if you want to continue?
Yeah, I mean, it does. It impacts every single area from start to finish. We're monitoring, Xvoucher monitors how can we utilize AI in our business. It's just a matter of staying up to date, educated, talking through stuff with people and other people in the industry that'll help you learn, help you again safeguard your program, and hopefully using this type of technology for the right things instead of it being used for the wrong things. But
yeah, it's almost the thread that kind of pulls all of this together, right? I mean, Tracy, you guys, like you said earlier, like, you're focused on this, you're very excited about this, but you don't know as much about some of the other things, and that's how everyone is, right? So how does that kind of thread pull through in your eyes?
you're on mute, Tracy.
Darn it. I was hoping to make it the whole way through without doing that. I was just saying, to Jake's point about, the collaboration. I think what's great about, the organizations with which we work is that we kind of know what we know and what we don't know. And, really work together and contribute to that collaboration. So for example, Alpine isn't doing a ton, and I'm not spending a ton of time on that content generation. But we are now focusing, it's led to a need for, okay, if you get all of this content and you've got all of this content that's been produced, is it all good? How do you know? How do you review it and know what to move forward and what's useful and what you need to, make better or shouldn't, isn't acceptable to put as an exam item? And so, that's, where I've got a lot of experience, the team has a lot of experience, and so we're able to jump in and respond to that need that's been created. I can promise you that I'm not going to be jumping on calls with tax attorneys because I know that is not my lane, and I will leave that to Jake and the Xvoucher team. So yeah, I mean, I think it's really it's just going to push our industry forward. There's going to be new needs. There's going to be new ways in which to do business, and we're just going to have to continue to be open-minded and responsive.
Yeah, that brings up the example. I was speaking to a college professor who is at Clemson University, and he was actually using AI to generate his content. So he would sometimes get to class and the students and he wouldn't know the new things that were added to his curriculum, which was kind of a cool, little bit scary situation. But for the field that he was teaching in, it was really exciting to always have the newest information. So I think it's going to be so exciting to kind of watch how this plays through and how that works through to the exams too, if he's just learning about new things and hasn't, back in the day, you might think like an instructor created something and it's the same test every single year, right? So now everything is changing all the way through the curriculum and semester. It's interesting. And I'm sure this plays through to every single industry as well, right? You can talk about IT, you can talk about healthcare, you can talk so many different ones. Okay, so what's the most crucial piece of advice that you would give to credentialing program managers regarding content security and compliance? If you're kind of pulling it all together, Tracy, let's start with you.
Sure. So, one piece of advice is so hard, but I think, I would say it's really easy. I've seen a lot of programs and they just get overwhelmed by these topics and they kind of just want to like cover their ears and close their eyes and pretend that it doesn't exist because they think it's not relevant yet and they'll get to it later. And I think I would just encourage you to know that it is relevant, and that the best way to do right by your program is to attend to these issues, even if you're just taking baby steps, right? And to know that you're not going at it alone, right? So there are others out there, who know about tax compliance law or who know about, complex data models and statistical analysis that can support you through it.
Great. Yeah, I think leaning on each other is honestly the way to go. It's having that, having that ability to say, I know about this. I don't know about this. Tell me what you're seeing. Tell me what you're facing. Tell me how you're handling it. Okay, Jake, what are you thinking? Biggest crucial piece of advice?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of advice I can give, but we'll stick to the topics. But no, compliance, security is always evolving. Stay aware. I feel like I'm beating on the same drum, but stay aware of any and all changes. Don't get comfortable. As Tracy had mentioned, rely on experts, rely on people that can help you with your program. You likely can't do it all. I know a lot of us think we can do it all, but this isn't one of those areas to where you want to go, I can do it all, and you're running thin, right? And these are critical areas that could put the programs at risk, customers at risk, et cetera. And find partners or internal folks that you can trust and that are reputable in the industry, that take the risks off your plate. Just as important as taking and putting your mind at ease. Don't have security and compliance be what keeps you up at night, right? If somebody's we always what keeps you up at night. Don't have it to be security and compliance. That's just way too risky of areas to be messing around with and not have your ducks in a row.
Great. Thank you both. If there's any questions, if you guys want to enter them in the chat now, we'd love to see those. And I think that makes the most sense. And you don't want it to be the thing keeping you up at night, but you also don't want to completely be sleeping without thinking about it at all either. You want to make sure somebody's thinking about it.
Good point.
Okay. All right, so we have one question in the chat. So what future trends do you anticipate for compliance in the industry? Tracy, do you want to start?
Oh, I was going to kick this one to Jake around compliance, if that's allowed.
Okay, Jake.
Yeah, so everything's fair game, right? Everything changes and it's evolving constantly as far as compliance goes. I'll bring back up the digital taxes, taxes on digital services or digital products. that's big, right? That's going to impact everybody in this industry, and there's no question about it. You know, Canada's going to kind of lead the way. Other countries are going to follow suit at some point. It may not be in 2024 like Canada is, but that's probably the one thing that I would say, make sure you're paying attention to that. Make sure that you don't get caught off guard, that you are paying attention to the global taxes. You know, that's a challenge. That's where you can rely on partners. But it's a matter of, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So just be on the lookout for that. Make sure that you're monitoring the industry closely as it relates to those taxes and the digital products that are going to be, I think, going to be not heavily taxed, but they're going to be part of the tax programs for these countries going forward. So
that makes sense. And Tracy, I mean, anything industry-wise other than AI? I know everyone's talking about AI. Anything else you can think of that, you know, is for the future?
Yeah, I'll just say, I mentioned proxy test takers earlier, and I think, you know, as an industry to respond to that threat, I think, you know, there's lots of ways in which we're trying to combat that, you know, tracking IP addresses and things like that, to ensure that people, you know, even with online proctoring, that we can confirm that you know, someone is who they say that they are. So I see that I would fully expect that there'll be a lot of advances, particularly around proxy test taking in the near future. And then responding to the other creative ways in which these bad actors will come up with ways to either get content or get a leg up on the assessments.
Great. Okay. Well, I don't see any more questions here. If you've got any more questions afterwards, you can reach out to us and we'll be happy to create a piece of content or answer them for you. Thank you so much, Tracy, Jake, for joining us. Thank you to everyone who's attending. We appreciate it. And again, the recording will be available for you. It'll be emailed to you afterwards. So if you'd like to go back and review or think of any questions later, just please reach out.